The fever had her in its grip for 3 days when she finally whispered the name that would change everything. Valdemar. Grace Donovan didn't know where the name came from. She'd been burning up in her small studio apartment above the antique bookstore where she worked, too weak to do more than drift in and out of consciousness. Her landlord, Mrs. Chen, had brought soup twice, but Grace couldn't keep anything down. The doctors at the clinic said it was just a virus, that it would pass. But this felt different, ancient, like something crawling through her veins that didn't belong in this century. In her delirium, she saw him. White hair flowing past broad shoulders, skin pale as moonlight, eyes like frozen mercury that seemed to hold the weight of empires. He wore black armor that looked medieval, ornate and terrifying, with a crown of twisted silver resting on his brow. When he looked at her in the dream, something in her chest recognized him, called to him, even though she'd never seen his face before in her waking life. Valdemar, she breathed again, her voice cracking. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Grace's eyes flew open, and she knew immediately she wasn't alone anymore. The figure standing at the foot of her bed made the dream seem like a pale imitation. He was taller than any man she'd ever seen, and everything about him screamed predator. His white hair caught the dim light from her bedside lamp, and his skin looked like carved marble. He wore modern clothes, a black shirt and fitted pants, but there was nothing contemporary about the way he held himself. Like royalty, like danger. How do you know that name? His voice was low, accented with something she couldn't place, and it sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with her fever. Grace tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her. She collapsed back against her sweat-soaked pillows, her heart hammering. Who are you? How did you get in here? He moved then, and it wasn't human. One moment at the foot of her bed, the next standing beside her, looking down with those impossible silver eyes. Answer my question, girl. How do you know the name Valdemar? I dreamed it, she managed, her throat raw. I've been dreaming about someone. For days. I don't know why. Something shifted in his expression, his eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer, breathing in deeply. Grace should have been terrified, and part of her was, but another part felt something else entirely. Recognition, longing, things that made no sense. You're sick, he said, and there was something almost like concern in his voice now. He reached out, and she felt his hand against her forehead. His touch was cool, soothing against her burning skin. This fever, it's not natural. No kidding, Grace whispered. Who are you? He pulled his hand back, and she watched him war with himself about something. Finally, he spoke. My name is Theron Silvain, and the name you whispered, Valdemar, I wore it 600 years ago, before I took my current identity. Grace's fever-addled mind struggled to process this. That's impossible, is it? He tilted his head, and in the lamplight she saw his canines, too long, too sharp. You're dreaming of a vampire king from centuries past, burning with a fever that no human illness could cause, and calling to me across a city of millions. Which part of your life feels possible right now? She wanted to argue, to say he was crazy, but she'd seen too many strange things in her dreams, felt too much truth in the impossible images. Vampire, she repeated weakly. Yes, he said it with pride, without shame or hesitation. I ruled the northern court for 3 centuries under the name Valdemar before circumstances required me to step away from that particular throne. Very few living souls know that name anymore. Then how do I know it? Theron's expression turned serious. That's what I intend to find out. But first, we need to address this fever. It's killing you, the doctor said. The doctors are human and they're fools. He interrupted. This is blood fever. It happens sometimes when a human has a connection to one of my kind. Your body is trying to bridge a gap it was never meant to cross. If left untreated, you'll be dead by morning. The blunt words sent ice through her veins despite the heat consuming her. Connection? I've never even met a vampire before. At least I don't think I have. Theron sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress not even dipping under his weight. Tell me about the dreams. Everything. Grace's head was spinning, but she forced herself to focus. They started about a week ago. At first just flashes. A castle. Battles. Then I started seeing you, Valdemar. You were in a throne room and there were hundreds of people bowing. You looked. She trailed off, heat that had nothing to do with fever creeping into her cheeks. I looked what? His voice was softer now, curious. Magnificent, she admitted. Terrible and beautiful at the same time. And there was something else. A woman. She was dying and you were holding her and you were... Grace's breath caught. You were crying. I've never seen anyone look so destroyed. Theron went completely still. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. What did this woman look like? Dark hair, brown eyes. She wore a green dress. She told you she'd find you again. That love like yours couldn't end. And then she died in your arms. The vampire king stood abruptly, turning away from her. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched into fists. "Seraphina," he said, and the name sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. Her name was Seraphina, and she died in 1426. Grace struggled to sit up again, managing it this time despite her weakness. Who was she? The only woman I ever loved, the only human who ever. He turned back to face her, and the anguish in his eyes made Grace's heart clench. She was my consort. We had 5 years together before a rival court poisoned her. She died in my arms exactly as you described, and her last words were exactly what you said. "I don't understand," Grace said. "Why would I dream about your memories?" Theron moved back to her bedside, and this time when he looked at her, there was something almost like wonder in his expression. Seraphina believed in reincarnation. She studied it obsessively, in fact. She said she'd find a way back to me, that death wouldn't be the end. He reached out slowly, giving Grace time to pull away, and touched her face with gentle fingers. "You have her eyes. I didn't notice at first, but now. The same shade of brown, the same shape. And if you're seeing her memories, her last moments, you think I'm her? Reborn?" Grace's rational mind rebelled against the idea even as something deeper resonated with it. "I think it's possible. More than possible." His thumb stroked along her cheekbone, and Grace felt her breath catch. "And if you are, if even a part of her soul lives in you, then this fever makes sense. You're remembering. Your human body is trying to reconcile human life with memories of loving something immortal. The conflict is tearing you apart. How do I stop it?" Theron's jaw tightened. "The fever ends one of two ways. Either the connection is severed completely, which would mean blocking the memories, possibly damaging your mind in the process, or it's completed." "Completed how?" He looked at her for a long moment, then held out his wrist. "Blood bond. Not enough to turn you, but enough to bridge the gap. Enough to let your body accept what your soul already knows." Grace stared at his pale wrist, then up at his face. "If I do this, what happens to me? You'll be bound to me. You'll feel my presence, my emotions to some degree. You'll be stronger, heal faster, live longer than normal humans. And the fever will break." He paused. "But you'll also be mine, Grace Donovan. In the eyes of vampire law, you'll be under my protection, my claim. Other vampires won't be able to touch you without declaring war on me. And if I say no, then I'll try to save you another way, but I can't promise success. The fever is already advanced." His expression softened. "I won't force this. Even if you are Seraphina reborn, you're also your own person. The choice is yours." Grace's mind was reeling. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been inventory at the bookstore. Now she was talking about blood bonds with a vampire king in past lives. It should have been insane. It was insane. But her body was failing, she could feel it. And looking into Theron's silver eyes, she felt that same recognition from her dreams, that sense of home. "If I'm her, if I'm even part of her, then I already loved you once," Grace said quietly. "And these dreams, they don't feel like someone else's memories. They feel like mine, like something I forgot and I'm finally remembering." Theron's expression cracked, showing raw vulnerability underneath the regal mask. "You don't know how long I've waited. 600 years of emptiness." "I never thought do it," Grace interrupted. "Whatever happens, I don't want to die without knowing the truth." He didn't hesitate. Theron bit into his own wrist with those sharp fangs, and dark blood welled up immediately. He pressed it to Grace's lips, and she tasted copper and something else, something that sang through her veins like electricity. "Drink," he commanded softly. Grace did. The blood was strange, cool and thick, but as it slid down her throat, she felt the fever begin to break. More than that, she felt memories flooding back, not just the death scene but others. A first meeting in a castle garden, dancing at a ball while vampires watched with hungry eyes, heated arguments and passionate reconciliations. Theron teaching her to defend herself with a blade. The day he'd offered her his blood for the first time, binding them together. The years of love and danger and absolute certainty that they belonged together. When Theron pulled his wrist away, Grace gasped. The fever was gone completely, and she felt stronger than she had in days. But more than that, she felt him. His presence in her mind like a constant warmth, his emotions bleeding into hers. Surprise, hope, fear, love, so much love it nearly overwhelmed her. "Seraphina?" he whispered. Grace looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I remember, not everything, but enough. I remember loving you. I remember dying. I remember promising I'd come back." Theron made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear. "I searched for you. For decades after you died, I searched for any sign that you'd returned. Eventually, I gave up hope." "I'm sorry it took so long," Grace said against his chest. "I don't know how it works. I don't know why I only started remembering now. It doesn't matter." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands coming up to frame her cheeks. "You're here, you're alive, that's all that matters. I'm not her though, not entirely. Grace needed him to understand. I'm also Grace. I have different memories, a different life. I work in a bookstore. I have friends. I like terrible reality TV shows. I'm not a medieval noblewoman anymore. I know. Theron's smile was soft, transforming his severe features into something breathtaking. But you're also the woman who loved me enough to defy death itself, and that's who I've been missing. Grace felt her heart race. What happens now? His expression turned serious. Now we face the complications. My world has changed since Serafina's time. I'm no longer openly a king. I run my court from the shadows, and there are other vampires who would see you as a weakness to exploit. The blood bond will protect you to a degree, but there will be those who test it. Why did you step down? From being Valdemar, I mean. Theron's jaw tightened. After you died, I became unstable, dangerous. I made decisions that put my entire court at risk. My advisors convinced me to take a new name, a new role. I still lead, but from behind a more careful mask. Valdemar is considered a historical figure now, a cautionary tale about vampires who love humans too deeply. And if people find out I'm connected to that history, some will try to kill you. Some will try to use you against me. And some, he paused, some will see it as a sign. There are old prophecies about the return of the king's lost love, about what it means for vampire kind when death itself is conquered by human devotion. Grace took a shaky breath. That's a lot of pressure. We don't have to tell anyone. Not yet. Theron's fingers traced gentle patterns on her skin. Right now, to the wider world, you're simply a human under my protection. We have time to figure out the rest. How much time? As long as you need. You're bonded to me now. You'll age much more slowly than normal humans. We could have decades before anyone notices. The thought of decades with him made something warm bloom in Grace's chest, but there were practical matters to consider. I have a life here, Theron. A job, an apartment. I can't just disappear. I'm not asking you to. I have a residence here in the city, a penthouse that's much safer than this. He glanced around her small studio with obvious disapproval. But you can keep your job if it makes you happy. I just need you somewhere I can protect you properly. A penthouse, Grace repeated. Of course you have a penthouse. His lips quirked. I've had 600 years to accumulate wealth. I own half the buildings in this city's financial district. Grace laughed despite everything. I went from barely making rent to being protected by a billionaire vampire king. This is insane. Yes, Theron agreed. But is it unwelcome? She looked at him, really looked at him. In her memories as Serafina, she'd loved this man with an intensity that burned. She'd known his kindness beneath the ruthless exterior, his fierce protectiveness, his unexpected gentleness. And now, as Grace, she could feel the truth of it humming through their bond. He wasn't just some monster from the dark. He was Theron who'd mourned for 600 years, who'd given up his throne because losing her had broken something in him. No, she said softly. Not unwelcome. Scary as hell, but not unwelcome. Relief flooded through their bond, and Theron leaned his forehead against hers. I won't let anything happen to you, not this time. I know. And she did know with a certainty that came from both lives. But I'm not a fragile noble anymore. If I'm going to survive in your world, I need to be able to protect myself too. Pride flickered in his eyes. Serafina said something similar once. I taught her to fight, even though it scandalized my court. Then you can teach me too. Grace pulled back, meeting his gaze firmly. I mean it, Theron. I appreciate the protection, but I won't be helpless. Agreed. He stood, and Grace realized for the first time just how commanding his presence was. Even in her small apartment, he seemed to fill the space with an almost physical power. Can you stand? Grace swung her legs out of bed and was surprised to find she felt completely steady. The fever was truly gone, and in its place was a vitality she'd never experienced before. I feel amazing, actually, the blood bond. Your body is already adapting. Theron offered his hand. We should go. I need to get you somewhere secure before dawn. Dawn? What time is it? Nearly 4 in the morning. I have perhaps 2 hours before I need to be inside and away from windows. Grace took his hand, ignoring the thrill that went through her at the contact. Right, sunlight, that's really a thing? Very much so. It won't kill me instantly. But prolonged exposure is extremely unpleasant. He guided her toward her closet. Pack what you need for a few days. We can arrange for the rest to be moved later. As Grace threw clothes into a bag, her mind kept circling back to the impossibility of it all. Yesterday she'd been a normal woman with a normal life. Now she was packing to move in with a vampire king because apparently she was the reincarnation of his dead lover. It should have felt wrong, or forced, but instead it felt like something clicking into place. Question, she said, zipping up her bag. How many people know what you really are, that you're Valdemar, in the vampire world? Most of the old ones know or suspect. The younger vampires know me only as Theron Silvain, a moderately powerful member of the Shadow Court. He took her bag from her, slinging it over his shoulder with effortless strength. In the human world? No one. We've learned to hide ourselves well over the centuries. Shadow Court? One of 5 courts that govern vampire society in North America. I lead it, though publicly my second-in-command takes most of the credit. He led her to the door, then paused. Grace, when we get to my home there will be other vampires there. Servants, guards. They'll know you're bonded to me, they'll be able to smell my blood in you, but they won't know the full story. What should I tell them? Nothing. Let me handle it. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. Trust me to keep you safe. I do, Grace said, and meant it. The city streets were empty at this hour, and Theron moved through them with preternatural grace, one hand always on Grace's lower back. She felt his constant vigilance through their bond, the way he monitored every shadow, every sound. This was what he'd been doing for centuries, staying alert, staying ahead of threats, surviving in a world that wanted him dead. His building was exactly what she'd expected. Sleek, modern, expensive. The doorman nodded respectfully to Theron but didn't say a word. The elevator required a key to access the penthouse level. Everything screamed money and power. You really committed to the billionaire aesthetic, Grace observed as they rode up. Theron's lips twitched. In Serafina's time I had castles and estates. The modern equivalent is real estate portfolios and corporate holdings. Wealth means safety, means resources, means the ability to protect what's mine. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse and Grace's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights spread out below them. The furniture was elegant and clearly expensive, but what caught her attention was the art on the walls, medieval tapestries alongside modern paintings, ancient weapons displayed like museum pieces, books that looked centuries old on custom shelves. It's beautiful, she said. It's home. Theron set her bag down, then turned to her. Your room is down that hall, second door, or, he hesitated. You can stay with me. I won't pressure you, but the bond works better with proximity, especially in the beginning. Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. Memories from her life as Serafina flickered through her mind, nights spent in Theron's arms, the safety and passion she'd found there. But she was also Grace, who'd only met this man a few hours ago, prophecies and past lives notwithstanding. I need to think, she said carefully. This is all happening so fast. Hurt flashed through their bond before Theron locked it down. Of course, take all the time you need. He gestured to the hallway. The room is yours for as long as you want it. You're safe here. Grace caught his hand before he could turn away. I'm not rejecting you. I just need to process. 6 hours ago I was dying of a mysterious fever. Now I'm apparently the reincarnation of your dead girlfriend and bonded to a vampire king. That's a lot. Theron's expression softened. You're right. I'm sorry. I've waited so long that now that you're here, I want. He cut himself off. I'm being unfair. You deserve time to adjust. Thank you. Grace squeezed his hand. But for what it's worth, the memories I have, the feelings Serafina had for you, they're not gone. They're just mixing with everything else. Hope bloomed through their bond. That's more than I dared dream. Get some rest, Grace. We'll talk more after you've slept. The room he'd indicated was gorgeous, king-sized bed with silk sheets, attached bathroom with a tub that could fit 3 people, and a window that showed the city beginning to lighten with approaching dawn. Grace showered quickly, washing away the last remnants of her fever, then collapsed into bed. She expected to lie awake, her mind too full of impossibilities to rest. Instead, sleep claimed her almost immediately, and with it came more dreams, more memories. She saw Theron in his prime as Valdemar, commanding armies of vampires with absolute authority. Saw him in quieter moments, reading in a library or walking through moonlit gardens. Saw the way other vampires looked at him with fear, yes, but also respect and loyalty. And she saw herself as Serafina, learning to navigate the dangerous world of vampire politics, earning her own place at his side not through weakness but through intelligence and courage. There was one memory that stood out. She'd been threatened by a rival vampire, a beautiful woman named Lysandra who'd wanted Valdemar for herself. Instead of running to him for help, Serafina had challenged Lysandra directly, using words and wit instead of violence. She'd won, earning Lysandra's grudging respect and eventually an uneasy friendship. Grace woke to afternoon sunlight streaming through her window, the memory still vivid in her mind. She could hear movement in the penthouse, quiet footsteps, low voices. When she emerged from her room dressed in clean clothes, she found a woman in the kitchen. The woman turned and Grace's breath caught. White hair, pale skin, red eyes, definitely a vampire. She was beautiful in that otherworldly way, and she was currently pouring what looked like blood into a wine glass. You must be Grace, the woman said, her voice carrying a British accent. I'm Celeste, I manage Theron's household. Hi. Grace felt suddenly awkward. Is he? Sleeping. Vampires are generally dormant during daylight hours, though we can force ourselves awake if necessary. It's just unpleasant. Celeste set down the glass and studied Grace with open curiosity. He left instructions that you're to have anything you want: food, clothing, access to his accounts. You're bonded to him? Grace nodded, unsure how much to say. Celeste's expression shifted to something like wonder. I've served Theron for 200 years and I've never known him to bond with anyone. Not since. She cut herself off. Well, you must be very special. It's complicated, Grace said. It always is with him. Celeste's smile was knowing. But he's a good master, better than most. If you've earned his protection, you'll find he takes it very seriously. Grace spent the day exploring the penthouse and trying to wrap her mind around her new reality. Celeste was a font of information, explaining vampire customs and politics with patient detail. Grace learned that there were thousands of vampires in North America alone, organized into 5 courts that maintained an uneasy balance of power. She learned that Theron's Shadow Court was considered the most secretive and most dangerous, dealing with information and intelligence. He's essentially the spy master for our entire world, Celeste explained. Everyone comes to him when they need to know something, and he trades in secrets like currency. It makes him powerful but also makes him a target. And no one knows he used to be Valdemar. Celeste's eyes widened. You know about that? Then he must trust you enormously. Yes, some of the old ones suspect, but he's been careful to maintain the fiction. Valdemar was too powerful, too feared. His enemies would unite against him if they knew he was still active. Grace thought about this as the sun set, and she felt Theron's presence stir through their bond. He emerged from his room an hour later, looking impossibly fresh despite having been asleep all day. You're still here, he said, and she heard the relief in his voice. Did you think I'd run? I wasn't sure. He moved into the kitchen, and Grace saw him pour himself a glass from the same container Celeste had used earlier. Blood. She should have been disgusted, but somehow she wasn't. How are you feeling? Good. Strong. Celeste has been teaching me about vampire politics. Theron shot a look at his servant, who smiled innocently. Has she now? Someone needs to educate the girl, Celeste said, unless you plan to keep her ignorant and vulnerable. I plan to let her adjust before overwhelming her with information, Theron replied dryly. But there was fondness in his tone. Celeste bowed slightly. I'll leave you two alone. I have errands to run. She vanished with that unnatural vampire speed, and suddenly Grace was alone with Theron. She's right, though, Grace said. I need to know how your world works if I'm going to survive in it. Theron set down his glass and moved closer. You've been thinking about a lot of things. About Serafina and who I am now. About what it means to be bonded to you. Grace met his gaze steadily. I have questions. Ask them. The prophecy Celeste mentioned about the king's lost love returning. What does it actually say? Theron's expression turned guarded. It's old from before even my time. It speaks of a vampire king who loses his human consort to death, and of her eventual return. When she comes back, it's supposed to signal a shift in vampire society, a breaking of old barriers between human and vampire kind. That sounds ominous. It could be. There are vampires who believe humans are nothing more than food, that bonding with them is weakness. If they knew you were Serafina returned, they might see you as a symbol of everything they hate. He reached out, taking her hands in his. That's why we have to be careful. But you believe it? The prophecy? I believe you're here, and that's enough of a miracle for me. The rest, we'll face it together. Grace squeezed his hands. I had a memory today about Lysandra. She was another vampire and she wanted you for herself. Theron's jaw tightened. Lysandra is dead. She was killed in a court purge 100 years ago. Oh, Grace felt oddly sad about that. In the memory, Serafina stood up to her, proved she could handle herself in your world. She did. Pride flickered through their bond. Serafina was remarkable. Brave beyond reason. I want to be that brave, but I also want to be smart about it. Grace took a breath. Teach me, not just fighting but everything. How to navigate vampire politics, how to spot threats, how to protect myself when you're not around. Theron studied her for a long moment. If I do this, you follow my instructions exactly. No improvising, no taking unnecessary risks, agreed. And you stay close until you're ready. No wandering off alone, no testing your limits without backup. Okay. He pulled her closer and Grace felt her heart rate spike. You understand that this makes you even more mine? That I'll be investing time and knowledge into you that I've given no one else in centuries? I understand. Grace looked up at him, seeing both the vampire king and the man who'd loved her across lifetimes. But I'm already yours, Theron. The bond made sure of that. This just makes it more of a partnership. Something in his expressions cracked, and then he was kissing her. Not gentle, not tentative, but with 600 years of longing poured into it. Grace gasped against his mouth, and memories flooded back, kissing him like this before, feeling this same intensity, this same desperate need. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and she felt his arms wrap around her waist, lifting her effortlessly. The bond between them sang, emotions bleeding back and forth until she couldn't tell where his desire ended and hers began. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Theron rested his forehead against hers. "I've missed you," he whispered. "Every day for 600 years. I've missed you." "I'm here now," Grace said. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." That night, Grace didn't sleep in the guest room. She stayed with Theron, wrapped in his arms, feeling safer than she had in her entire life. They talked for hours about her life as Grace, about his centuries of existence, about the challenges ahead. He told her about the Shadow Court, about the vampires who served him and the enemies who wanted him dead. She told him about her quiet life in the bookstore, her love of old texts and forgotten stories. "I think that's what drew me to antique books," Grace mused. "Some part of me remembered loving them before." Serafina collected books obsessively. She had a library that rivaled mine. Theron's fingers traced patterns on her arm. "When she died, I couldn't bear to look at them. I donated most to museums, kept only a few favorites." "Do you still have them?" "In storage. I couldn't destroy them, but I couldn't keep them close either." He paused. "Would you want to see them?" "Yes, I'd like that." Over the following weeks, Grace's life transformed completely. She kept her job at the bookstore partly because she loved it, partly because Theron agreed she needed to maintain some normalcy. But her evenings and nights became dedicated to learning everything about the vampire world. Theron was a demanding teacher. He taught her to fight with blades and without them, teaching her to use her smaller size to her advantage. He taught her vampire customs and politics, making her memorize the names and allegiances of every major player in all 5 courts. He taught her how to spot other vampires, how to recognize the signs of different ages and power levels. And slowly, carefully, he introduced her to his world. The first vampire she met beyond Celeste was a man named Marcus, Theron's second in command. He was ancient, over 1,000 years old, with white hair and ice-blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "So you're the human who's captured our Lord's attention," Marcus said, circling Grace like a predator. They were in Theron's private training room, and Grace forced herself to stand still under the scrutiny. "Celeste says you're learning quickly." "I'm trying," Grace said. "Trying isn't enough in our world. You either succeed or you die." Marcus moved faster than she could track, suddenly behind her with a training knife at her throat. "What do you do?" Grace's heart hammered, but she remembered Theron's lessons. Instead of pulling away from the blade, she slammed her head back into Marcus's face, then dropped her weight and twisted. The knife missed her throat by inches, and she came up with her own blade in hand, pointed at Marcus's chest. The ancient vampire laughed, genuinely delighted. "Good. She has instincts. That's more than most bonded humans manage." Theron, watching from the side, looked pleased but not surprised. "She's had excellent training before." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Before? What does that mean?" "It means she's more than she appears," Theron said smoothly. "And that's all you need to know for now." Over the following months, Grace met more of Theron's court. Some were welcoming, curious about the human who'd bonded with their mysterious leader. Others were hostile, seeing her as weakness to be exploited. Grace learned to navigate both with equal care, using the skills Theron taught her and the memories that continued to surface from her past life. She was sitting in Theron's study one evening, reading through old vampire law texts, when a name caught her eye. "Theron? Who's Constantine Ravencross?" Theron, working at his desk, went very still. "Where did you see that name?" "Here. It says he's the current king of the Northern Court, your old court." Grace looked up. "Is he the one who took over when you stepped down?" "Not exactly. Constantine was my rival for centuries. When I became unstable after Serafina's death, he leveraged the situation to claim the throne himself." Theron's voice was carefully neutral, but Grace could feel anger simmering through their bond. "He's powerful, ambitious, and he hates me because you used to have what he wanted?" "Partly. Also because he knows that if I ever chose to reclaim my position, I could. I may have stepped back, but I never formally abdicated. By vampire law, I'm still Valdemar, the rightful Northern King." Grace closed the book. "Would you want to reclaim it, I mean?" Theron was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think I would, that someday I'd be stable enough to take back what was mine. But now," he looked at her, "now I have something more important than a throne. I have you. And claiming kingship would paint a target on your back that even I might not be able to protect against. What if we didn't have a choice? What if staying hidden isn't an option anymore?" "Why would you say that?" Grace stood, moving to his desk. "Because I've been reading these texts, and I've been talking to Celeste and Marcus and the others, And there's something everyone keeps dancing around but won't say directly. The courts are unstable. There are power struggles happening, alliances shifting. It feels like something big is building. Theron reached out, pulling her into his lap. You're too observant for your own good. I had a good teacher. Grace nestled against his chest. Tell me the truth. Are we in danger? We're always in danger. It's the nature of vampire existence. He sighed. But yes, you're right. Constantine has been making moves lately, testing boundaries, pushing at the edges of Shadow Court territory. I think he's looking for an excuse to start a war. Over what? Over me. Over the fact that I exist as a challenge to his legitimacy. Theron's arms tightened around her. If he finds out about you, about who you really are, he'll see me as leverage, yes. Grace was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, what if we told him first? What if instead of waiting for him to discover me, we controlled the narrative? Absolutely not, Grace. You can't. Hear me out, she interrupted. Right now, I'm a secret. I'm something he can use against you if he finds out. But what if I wasn't a secret? What if I was a statement? The return of Valdemar's consort, proof that you never really gave up your claim to the throne. Theron stared at her. That would start a war immediately, maybe. Or maybe it would make him think twice. You said yourself that you could reclaim the throne if you wanted. If he thinks you're preparing to do exactly that, with me as a symbol of your legitimacy, he might back down rather than face you in open conflict. Or he might attack before we're ready. Are we ever going to be ready? Grace turned in his lap to face him directly. How long can we hide, Theron? How long before someone figures it out? You said it yourself, the old prophecies talk about my return. If we're going to face this eventually, shouldn't we do it on our terms? Theron cupped her face in his hands. You're talking about putting yourself in extreme danger, about making yourself a target for every vampire who wants to hurt me. I'm already a target. Being bonded to you made sure of that. Grace covered his hands with hers. But I'm not Serafina anymore. I'm not going to die in your arms again while enemies celebrate. I'm going to fight, and I'm going to win. She saw the moment he truly understood what she was saying, that she wasn't asking for his protection, she was offering her partnership, that she wanted to stand beside him, not behind him. You're certain? He asked. I am. Theron's smile was fierce and proud. Then we do this together, but we do it smart. We gather allies first, make sure we have support among the other courts who would support us. The Eastern Court owes me favors, and the Western Court's queen has no love for Constantine. If I can convince them that supporting my return serves their interests. He was already thinking tactically, and Grace could feel his mind racing through possibilities. We'd need to make a formal announcement. At a gathering where all the courts are present. When's the next one? 3 months, the winter conclave. Theron stood, setting Grace on her feet but keeping his hands on her waist. It would give us time to prepare to gather support. But Grace, once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be thrust into vampire politics at the highest level. There will be attempts on your life, constant danger. I know. Grace looked up at him steadily. But I also know I can't hide forever. And I'd rather face this with you than wait for it to find me alone. The next 3 months were a whirlwind. Theron called in favors and made new alliances, reaching out to vampire lords and ladies he hadn't spoken to in decades. Grace trained harder than ever, not just in combat but in politics and diplomacy. Celeste drilled her on vampire customs until she could navigate formal courts in her sleep. Marcus taught her to read the subtle power plays and hidden threats in vampire conversations. And through it all, Grace and Theron grew closer. The bond between them deepened, their connection becoming as natural as breathing. Grace found herself falling in love with him all over again, not just remembering Serafina's love, but building something new as Grace. He was protective but never stifling, demanding but fair, dangerous but incredibly gentle with her. One night, a month before the conclave, Grace woke from another memory dream. This one had been different, not a memory of Serafina's life, but of her death. Grace had felt the poison burning through her veins, had felt her body failing despite Theron's desperate attempts to save her. And she'd felt Serafina's absolute certainty that this wasn't the end, that love like theirs transcended death itself. Grace? Theron was immediately awake beside her, sensing her distress. What's wrong? I remembered dying, she said quietly. Really remembered it, not just watching from outside. I felt everything she felt. Theron pulled her close. I'm sorry. I wish I could take those memories away. No, you don't understand. It wasn't just pain and fear. There was peace, too. She knew she'd come back. She trusted that completely. Grace looked up at him in the darkness. She loved you so much that she bent the laws of reality itself to return to you. And I would have done the same, Theron said fiercely. If there had been any way, I know. That's why it worked. That's why I'm here. Grace kissed him softly. We're going to win, Theron. At the conclave against Constantine, all of it. Because we've already defeated death itself. Everything else is just details. He laughed, the sound rough with emotion. Just details. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Maybe not easy, but simple. We love each other. We protect each other. We win, she grinned. And if anyone tries to stop us, we remind them exactly who you are. Not just Theron Silvain, but Valdemar, the king who ruled unchallenged for 3 centuries. With his fierce consort by his side, Theron added. They're going to love you and fear you in equal measure. Good. That's exactly what I'm aiming for. The winter conclave was held in a massive estate in the mountains, far from human eyes. 500 vampires gathered from across North America, representing all 5 courts. Grace could feel the power in the air as she and Theron arrived, ancient, deadly beings who'd lived for centuries watching their every move. She wore a dress that Theron had commissioned specifically for this night, deep emerald green silk that echoed the dress Seraphina had dyed in, but with a modern cut that was all grace. Her hair was swept up, revealing the mark on her neck where Theron had bitten her during their bonding. A claim, a statement. Remember, Theron murmured as they approached the main hall. Let them come to their own conclusions at first. We don't announce anything until I've gauged the room. I understand. They entered together and conversation stopped. Every eye turned to them, and Grace felt the weight of centuries of judgment and curiosity. She kept her head high, her hand steady on Theron's arm, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Theron Silvain, a voice rang out. Constantine Ravencross himself, approaching with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was handsome in the way all ancient vampires were, white-haired, pale-skinned, with eyes like chips of amber. How delightful that you've joined us. And you've brought a guest. My bonded consort, Theron said smoothly. Grace Donovan. Constantine's smile widened, showing too many teeth. How charming. I didn't realize you'd taken a human to bond. How very sentimental of you. Grace felt the insult but kept her expression neutral. Lord Ravencross, I've heard so much about you. Have you? All good things, I'm sure. His eyes raked over her dismissively. Tell me, my dear, do you know the history of the vampire you've bonded yourself to? I know he's far more than he appears, Grace said carefully. Indeed, although appearances can be deceiving. Constantine turned back to Theron. I trust you're here simply to observe? The Shadow Court has traditionally stayed neutral in major political decisions. We're here to witness, Theron agreed, and perhaps to remind everyone that neutrality doesn't mean weakness. The tension between them was palpable. Other vampires were circling now, sensing drama. Grace recognized some from Theron's descriptions: Lady Amara of the Eastern Court, ancient and shrewd. Lord Vane of the Western Court, brutal but honest. Others were strangers, but all watched with that predatory interest unique to vampires. Lady Amara approached, her dark eyes assessing Grace with open curiosity. Theron, how unexpected to see you with a bonded human. In all my years I've never known you to take that step. Grace is unique, Theron said. She'd have to be. Amara's gaze sharpened. There's something familiar about her. Have we met before, child? Grace met her eyes steadily. Not in this lifetime, my lady. The words hung in the air, deliberately ambiguous. Amara's eyes widened fractionally, and Grace saw understanding dawn. Fascinating, the ancient vampire murmured. The evening progressed with formal announcements and political maneuvering. Grace stayed at Theron's side, watching and learning. She caught hostile glances from some vampires, curious ones from others, and she felt Constantine's attention on her constantly, calculating and cruel. It was during a break in the proceedings that things came to a head. Grace had stepped out onto a balcony for air, and Constantine followed. Alone at last, he said, closing the doors behind them. I wanted to speak with you privately, Miss Donovan. Grace turned, keeping the balcony railing at her back. About what? About the mistake you're making. Bonding yourself to a vampire is dangerous enough, but bonding to Theron? You've signed your own death warrant. Constantine moved closer. He destroys everything he loves. Did he tell you about his last human consort? How she died screaming? She died of poison, Grace said coolly. Administered by his enemies. And she didn't scream, she died with Grace and the promise that she'd return. Constantine froze. What did you say? You heard me. Grace let power flow through her voice, drawing on memories and the strength of her bond with Theron. Seraphina promised she'd come back, and here I am. The Vampire King's expression shifted from smugness to shock to rage in rapid succession. That's impossible. Reincarnation is a myth. Is it? Then how do I know she died in a green dress? How do I know that Valdemar cried silver tears over her body? How do I know that you were one of the ones who orchestrated her death because you wanted his throne? Constantine's hand shot out, grabbing her throat. You know nothing, little girl. Let her go. Theron's voice was arctic, and suddenly he was there, moving between Grace and Constantine with lethal intent. Now. Constantine released Grace, stepping back, but his eyes were wild. She's lying. She has to be lying. She's not. Theron's power filled the air, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't the controlled, careful Theron who'd hidden himself for centuries. This was Valdemar, king and conqueror. Grace is Serafina reborn, and I'm done hiding. Other vampires were flooding onto the balcony now, drawn by the display of power. Grace saw shock, fear, and excitement on various faces. You can't be serious, Constantine said, but his voice shook. Valdemar is dead. He died with his consort. Valdemar stepped aside, Theron corrected. Because grief made me dangerous. But I never abdicated, never surrendered my claim to the Northern Throne. And now that Serafina has returned, as the prophecies said she would, I'm reclaiming what's mine. The declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled vampires. Lady Amara looked delighted. Lord Vane looked calculating. Others looked terrified. And Constantine looked like he wanted to kill them both right there. The Northern Court won't accept you, Constantine snarled. I've ruled for 600 years. You've kept the seat warm, Theron corrected. But you've never been king, not truly, and everyone here knows it. He looked around at the gathered vampires. I call for a vote of the courts. By ancient law, when a king's consort returns from death itself, his claim to the throne is absolute. Who stands with tradition? Lady Amara stepped forward immediately. The Eastern Court recognizes Valdemar's claim. Lord Vane was slower, but he nodded. The Western Court recognizes it as well. The prophecy was clear: when the lost love returns, the old king rises. One by one, vampires stepped forward, pledging support. Not all of them. Constantine had his loyalists, but enough. More than enough. Constantine's face was twisted with rage. This isn't over. You can't just walk back in and challenge me, Theron interrupted. If you believe you have the right to rule, challenge me by ancient law. Single combat to first submission or final death. Winner takes the throne. The crowd went utterly silent. Grace's heart hammered. She'd known this was coming, but hearing Theron issue the formal challenge made it terrifyingly real. Constantine smiled slowly. You're not what you once were, Valdemar. 600 years of hiding has made you soft. Then it should be an easy fight for you. Theron's smile was dangerous. Or are you afraid? Pride warred with caution on Constantine's face. Finally he nodded. I accept. 3 nights from now, under the dark moon. Witnessed by all 5 courts. Agreed. The 2 kings stared at each other for a long moment. Then Constantine turned and swept away, his followers trailing behind. The balcony erupted in conversation. Vampires debating and arguing and placing bets. Theron turned to Grace, his expression softening. Are you all right? He hurt you? Grace touched her throat, where bruises were already forming. I'm fine. That went better than I expected. Better? Grace, I just committed to fighting one of the most dangerous vampires in North America, and you're going to win. She said it with absolute certainty. Theron pulled her close, regardless of who was watching. I love you, he whispered. Both of you. Serafina and Grace. Everything you are, I love you too, Grace said. Now let's go prepare to reclaim your throne. The next 3 days were intense. Theron trained constantly, pushing his body to remember skills he'd set aside for centuries. Grace wanted to help, but Celeste and Marcus convinced her that the best thing she could do was stay safe and visible, a reminder to everyone of what Theron was fighting for. She spent her time meeting with vampires who'd pledged support, building alliances and making promises. Lady Amara became an unexpected ally, delighting in the drama and politics of it all. I knew there was something special about you, Amara said over tea. Grace drinking actual tea while Amara sipped blood from a delicate china cup. The way Theron looked at you, the way you carried yourself. It reminded me of Serafina, but I couldn't place why. You knew her? Grace asked, briefly. She attended a few court functions before her death. She was magnificent, brave, and clever, refusing to be intimidated by creatures 10 times her age. Amara smiled. You have that same fire. Constantine never stood a chance the moment you returned. The night of the challenge arrived too quickly. The fight was to be held in a neutral arena, an old amphitheater that had been used for vampire duels for centuries. Thousands of vampires gathered to watch, filling the stone seats with pale faces and glittering eyes. Grace sat in a place of honor, Marcus and Celeste flanking her protectively. She wore white this time, a deliberate choice. In vampire culture, white was the color of consorts and queens. A statement of her position. Theron and Constantine entered from opposite sides. Both wore minimal armor. This was to be a test of skill and power, not equipment. Grace's heart clenched, seeing Theron like this, ready for battle, every inch the warrior king he'd once been. An ancient vampire older even than Marcus stepped forward to officiate. By ancient law and sacred tradition, we witness this challenge. Theron Silvain, also known as Valdemar, challenges Constantine Ravencross for the throne of the Northern Court. The rules are simple. Fight until one submits or dies. Magic is permitted, weapons are permitted. Outside interference means automatic forfeiture. The elder looked between them. Do you both accept these terms? I accept, Theron said. I accept, Constantine echoed. Then begin. They moved simultaneously, and Grace gasped at the sheer speed of it. She'd seen Theron fight before, but never like this. Never with his full power unleashed. He was a blur of motion, trading blows with Constantine that would have shattered stone. Constantine was good. Grace could see why he'd held the throne for centuries. He was fast, brutal, and he fought dirty. But Theron was better. 600 years hadn't dulled his skills. If anything, his time away had made him sharper, more focused. Magic crackled through the air as both vampires called on their power. Constantine summoned shadows, trying to blind and confuse. Theron countered with light, actual light, anathema to most vampires, but he wielded it like a weapon. The fight raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Grace watched, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood. She felt every hit Theron took through their bond, felt his determination and his rage. Finally, Theron saw his opening. Constantine overextended on a strike and Theron moved inside his guard. There was a sickening crack, and Constantine hit the ground with Theron's hand around his throat. Submit, Theron commanded, his voice carrying through the amphitheater. Constantine struggled, pride warring with survival instinct. Theron's grip tightened, and Grace felt his willingness to kill if necessary. I submit, Constantine finally gasped out. I submit. Theron held him for a moment longer, making sure everyone witnessed the defeat, then released him and stepped back. The northern court is mine. Anyone who disagrees can challenge me now. Silence, absolute silence. Then one vampire began to clap. Then another. Soon the entire amphitheater was filled with applause and cheers. Theron stood in the center of it all, bloody and victorious, and his eyes found Grace's across the crowd. She was already moving, pushing past Marcus and Celeste, running down to the arena floor. She didn't care about decorum or vampire politics. She just needed to be with him. Theron caught her as she threw herself into his arms, lifting her effortlessly. We won, he said, wonder in his voice. We actually won. Of course we did, Grace said, laughing and crying at the same time. I told you we would. He kissed her there in front of thousands of vampires, claiming her as thoroughly as he'd claimed his throne. The crowd roared its approval. Later in Theron's in their penthouse, Grace sat curled against him on the couch while he healed from the fight. Vampire healing was fast, but he'd taken serious damage. What happens now? Grace asked. Now I actually have to rule a court again, Theron said wryly. Which means politics and meetings and all the things I've avoided for centuries, but you won't be alone this time. Grace laced her fingers through his. You'll have me, and Celeste and Marcus and all the allies we've made. True, he kissed her forehead. I've been thinking. There's a ceremony for when a vampire king takes a consort. It's like a wedding but more binding. It would make you officially my queen in vampire law. Grace's heart skipped. Are you asking me to marry you? Vampire style. I am. I know we've only been together a few months as Grace and Theron, even though our souls have loved each other for centuries. If it's too soon, it's not too soon. Grace sat up to look at him properly. I've loved you through death and rebirth. I think we've earned the right to skip normal dating timelines. His smile was radiant. Is that a yes? That's absolutely a yes. The ceremony was held a month later, giving time for preparations and for word to spread throughout the vampire world. It was held in the old castle that had once been Valdemar's seat of power, restored and reopened for the occasion. Grace wore a gown that combined elements from both her lives' medieval styling with modern touches, emerald green embroidered with silver. Theron wore the armor of Valdemar, the crown he'd set aside 600 years ago once again on his brow. The ceremony itself was beautiful and strange, mixing vampire traditions with elements Grace had requested from human weddings. They exchanged vows in front of all 5 courts, promising to protect and cherish each other for as long as they both existed. Theron gave her a queen's crown, delicate silver worked with emeralds, and she gave him a new seal for his throne, designed to incorporate both Valdemar and Theron Silvain into one identity. When it was done, when they were officially king and queen, consort and sovereign, Theron kissed her and whispered, "Thank you for coming back to me. Thank you for waiting," Grace whispered back, "and for making this life as beautiful as the last one." The celebration lasted 3 days. Vampires from around the world came to pay their respects and pledge loyalty to the restored king and his miraculous queen. Grace met vampires who'd known Serafina, who told her stories of the woman she'd been. She met young vampires who saw her as a symbol of hope, proof that humans and vampires could build something lasting together. But the moment she treasured most came on the final night, when she and Theron escaped the crowds to walk through the castle gardens alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Theron asked as they stood beneath an ancient oak tree. Choosing this life, you could have stayed human, stayed safe. Grace looked up at him, this impossible man who'd loved her across centuries. I chose you. Everything else is just details, remember? He laughed, the sound free and happy in a way she'd never heard before. Details. Yes, besides, Grace continued, I get to be queen of a vampire court, married to the most powerful vampire in North America, and I still get to work in a bookstore if I want. That's a pretty good deal. You want to keep working at the bookstore? Maybe not full-time, but yes. It's part of who I am as Grace, and I like having something that's mine, separate from being your consort. She squeezed his hand. Is that okay? It's perfect. You're perfect. Theron pulled her close. I love that you're not just Seraphina reborn, that you're your own person with your own life. It makes this us even more meaningful. They stood there in the moonlight, two people who'd found each other across impossible odds, and Grace felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. She was Grace Donovan, bookstore employee and vampire queen. She was the echo of Seraphina, who'd loved so fiercely she'd defied death. She was herself, unique and whole, and she was exactly where she belonged. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Theron replied, in this life and whatever comes after. And if, in the years that followed, they faced challenges and dangers, they faced them together. If there were vampires who resented Grace's position or Theron's power, they learned quickly that the king and queen were not to be trifled with. If there were moments of doubt or fear, they had each other to lean on. Grace lived a long life, much longer than any normal human, thanks to the blood bond and the magic that had brought her back across death itself. She became legendary in the vampire world, known for her wisdom and her fierce protection of both vampires and the humans who bonded with them. She established new laws that protected human consorts, that gave them rights and power within vampire society. She proved that humans could stand equal with vampires, that love could bridge any divide. And through it all, Theron was beside her. Not the broken king who'd mourned for centuries, but a whole man, healed by love and made stronger by the woman who'd refused to let death keep them apart. They ruled together for over a century before finally choosing to step back, passing the throne to trusted successors. By then they'd changed vampire society fundamentally, had built something lasting and good. On their last night in the castle, before they left to travel the world in the peaceful anonymity they'd earned, Grace stood with Theron in the same garden where they'd talked on their wedding night. Any regrets? She asked. Echoing his question from all those years ago, Theron pulled her close, and his smile held all the love and joy of their impossible journey. Not a single one. You came back to me, just like you promised. Everything else has been a gift. Grace kissed him as the moon rose overhead, feeling the bond between them stronger than ever, and knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly how their story was meant to go. Not a tragedy cut short by death, but a love story that spanned lifetimes and changed the world. They'd won, they'd survived, they'd loved, and in the end, that was more than either of them had ever dared to dream.